Welcome everybody to this week's Civic Conversation. We have a couple minutes here before we get started, so we'll start with some news. Big happening this week. We had our engineering failure of our New York State animal up on Olmstedville Road. We had a beaver dam collapse, which washed out a portion of Olmstedville Road. Warren County DPW was able to do some temporary repairs and get that back open, and they'll do full repaving later in the spring. Also, a reminder that this weekend is the last weekend of Thurman Maple Days, so fun activity. So if you haven't already been up to visit the 9 farms in Thurman, you can go to visitthurman.com, get a map of all of the participating farms, and go enjoy some yummy maple syrup. What else? That went faster than I was expecting. Oh, last, it's also the end weekend for an exhibit called Winter into Spring at Tannery Pond. So some beautiful artwork there, and that will be leaving us on Saturday. So if you haven't had a chance to visit that exhibit, Saturday would be a great time to do that. And it looks like we're just about at 2 o'clock here, so we'll get started. Welcome everybody to our weekly installment of Stories from Open Space. If you've been with us for the last few weeks, you're aware we've been taking a deep dive into what the Schaefers call cabin country, following the forever wild through line from John Apperson through the Schaefers and to Howard Zahniser. There's a reason we're doing this, and Kirstin Seleen is about to explain it to us. She's our guest today. Kirstin is the Natural Resources Planner for Region 5 of the Department of Environmental Conservation, and she covers the Siamese Ponds Wilderness and Wilcox Lake Wild Forests, which are the heart of the first wilderness area. So she has a special interest in this area, as well as the history surrounding the cabins and the Schenectady Force, the Schaefer and Zahniser families. So we're dedicating these conversations to the effort to research and tell the whole story. And Kirstin's going to start that story in 1872 with the creation of Yellowstone National Park. May Broughton is returning as our co-host reporter. Dan Forbush and Bill Walker are working on the back end to make everything proceed seamlessly. So they'll jump in from time to time, and then they'll manage the discussion at the end. We'll spend about 45 minutes on questions and answers. If there are questions for Kirstin, feel free to leave them in the chat and YouTube, and we'll relay them to her later in the conversation. And with that, we will turn it over to you, May.
Thank you so much, Sarah, and thank you, Kirstin, for being here. If we could begin by talking about your responsibilities at the DEC. So as a natural resources planner, what's your general role within the DEC? How long have you been doing it? With whom do you most interact? What team or teams do you work with? Those kind of questions.
Sure. So starting with just what my general role is, I am one of many land managers at DEC and within our division, which is Lands and Forests. We're responsible for the management of the Forest Preserve. So we divvy up the Forest Preserve by units, and my units that I manage are Siamese and Wilcox, as Sarah had mentioned. And in doing that, what does that mean? There are everything from broad scale planning, looking at the whole area. For example, Siamese is 115,000 acres. Wilcox is 125,000 acres. So it's almost 250,000 acres combined. And it's a big area. So, but there needs to be some structure and some organization to what types of recreational infrastructure, for example, are out on the ground. And that requires some upfront planning. And so, those sorts of things are handled in the unit management planning process, which is one of my big responsibilities. varying different areas of the park are in various states of that unit management planning process. Some units have finalized plans, others don't yet, but there are drafts in the works. And I have both. So Siamese has a finalized plan that has been being implemented for 15 plus years now. And then Wilcox is in the draft state and has been in the planning process for at least 15 years. But anyway, I've been doing this for about 7 years out of Warrensburg. I work mostly a lot with volunteers, forest rangers, my coworkers in my office and throughout DEC, other state agency land managers and local governments as well. We work everything from town highway departments that have to manage roads that go through forest preserve. There's a lot of interaction there. Anyway, in terms of teams, lots of committees, that kind of thing. But again, everything from that broad scale planning level, which is interdisciplinary often. I work with fisheries folks, wildlife folks when we're making a plan for a unit. All the way to a project level. We're building a bridge, and there's a team of folks that I involve in that, and I help to coordinate all the different resources that go into that. I'm not sure if I cover everything, but feel free to ask away.
Yeah, thank you so much for that. So now could we talk about your personal background a little bit? How would you describe your childhood? Did you have any aha moments that made you decide you wanted a career in open space or wilderness preservation? How did any interests that you had also contribute to your career choice, and how would you describe your career?
Thanks. It's funny, this is a question that I always get to ask of our stewards and intern hiring process. I am always curious how people come to an outdoor career in the outdoors. I did not even know it was an option when I was growing up. I spent a lot of time outdoors, as a lot of families do, camping and just playing in the woods. And, it wasn't until I was full on pre-med in my second year of pre-med at college. And my parents would say I did it in the dead of night, but I did go over to SUNY ESF and just talk to him because I had heard that there was this college that was focused entirely on the environment. And I had not known about it before. And in talking with them, I was immediately sold and transferred and then let my parents know. They were thrilled, doctor, ecologist. But it ended up being great because it's a wonderful, it's been a wonderful career. I can't, I know that I made the right choice. So in transferring to the Environmental Science and Forestry School in Syracuse, I had this great dendrology professor who kind of gave me my first opportunity, and that was a co-op position with the U.S. Forest Service, which was fantastic. It was a great program. They do something similar, not quite the same program now, but I highly recommend it. You get a very broad foundational training as part of that program, and I ultimately ended up in a landscape ecologist position with the Forest Service, and that was wonderful. And then I kind of wanted to get back to New York. That was in Michigan, and a position with the Nature Conservancy opened up, and I moved back here and worked with the Nature Conservancy, doing a lot of broad scale eco-regional planning is the approach that the Conservancy used. And that involved everything from identifying high priority areas to protect. And by protect, the Conservancy would often purchase property and conserve it in perpetuity, either themselves or through other partners. But they had to prioritize and focus their work. They couldn't just willy-nilly buy stuff everywhere. So that was cool. That was a cool sort of evolution. And then, you know, I took a leave from that in order to work for myself while raising my daughter, and was able to kind of participate in a lot of different conservation type of projects. And then came to DEC, this position, which is fantastic, working in the Forest Preserve. And if I had to sort of describe that evolution over the career, it's one of sort of narrowing down my interests. I focused originally when I was working in multiple use land management agency that's focused on sort of a very wide array of use of the land, including extractive uses, like timber management, that kind of thing. And I sort of moved all the way towards the another end of conservation, which is more towards sort of non-extractive uses and, you know, areas that are protected in perpetuity for their own sake. You know, I think there's a lot of value in us having reference ecosystems that can not only help us measure against, you know, what our activities, you know, how do those impacts, you know, compare with a reference ecosystem that is not managed. But also just, we don't know everything. So it's handy to, it's important for us to have these reference areas that are protected so that we can continue to learn how ecosystems function over time.
Absolutely. So before you talked a little bit about the Siamese Ponds Wilderness and the Wilcox Lake Wild Forest, which you said 250,000 acres of land that you're managing. So how would you describe these two incredibly vast areas that you manage? They're in Adirondack Park and their history, including how they were affected by forces of industrialization in the 1800s, and now who most frequents them, and environmentally, what are the main challenges they face?
Well, the Siamese and Wilcox are pretty big when it comes to units within the Forest Preserve, which is very cool. As I mentioned, almost 250,000 acres combined. It's bisected by Route 8. And as you've already heard in some of the other talks, the Zahniser and Schaefer cabins were sort of nestled against Siamese and looking out at Wilcox. So I do feel connected to it. You know, the area itself, in addition to that significance, has a lot of the older parcels of the Forest Preserve, some of the very first parcels of the Forest Preserve, which you know, is very cool. Most forests in the Adirondacks were managed in some way or harvested in some way, some all the way from just going in and taking out one species in particular. Spruce was one of the first species of interest of foresters, all the way to, you know, clear-cut hillsides. But a lot of the forests of Siamese and Wilcox have recovered incredibly well, and are, because they've had so long to recover, many of those older parcels that were only minimally entered function as old growth today, which is very cool. Let's see. You had a bunch of questions in there. Let's see. You know, throughout the forest preserve, there are some pretty neat, you know, you'll run into neat cultural locations like old foundations or old wells, and Siamese and Wilcox have those as well. There were also a couple of important tanneries that were along Route 8 that you can see the remains of, and had some historic significance. Switching gears to sort of the uses that are predominant in these areas, it's people mostly are hiking, biking, skiing, backpacking, camping, paddling, and hunting and fishing for sure. So I think, did I cover everything? Do you have environmentally main challenges? I would say probably, you know, climate change, of course, is a big concern. You know, you can protect the land, but if you have these broad scale impacts that are beyond your control, you're still going to see the effects of that. So, and we are certainly seeing those effects already in terms of species diversity and movement. And then invasive species are also of concern. And then just, you know, sort of the worry of unsustainable human use. So we really have to be pragmatic about how we're using, recreationally using the forest preserve. And so far that hasn't in the past been a huge problem in my particular areas. But it is something that over the last couple of years, we've seen real spikes in use levels in particular places. And so it's something we need to keep an eye on. I think that covers it.
Yes, thank you so much. That was a lot. So now to go back to the cabins, the Schaefer and Zahniser cabins, given their significance and the ideas crystallized therein, how do you think the DEC can best commemorate the place they occupy in the annals of wilderness preservation?
So this is exciting, and this is something that as I sort of learned of, I was aware of the significance of the Schaefers and the Zahnisers, but I didn't realize that it was right here, you know, and that is really cool. Just really inspirational, I would say. So I would like for more people to know that, and the department is very interested in celebrating it. You know, I'd like to see an improvement in a parking area, and some interpretive information, a kiosk that describes the significance of what happened there, which is, you know, could include like photos, excerpts of maybe the Wilderness Act, maybe drafts that, you know, earlier drafts that were worked on right there at the cabin. I'd like to develop some trail connections that would connect from the end of the road there, Edwards Hill, on state land, all the way to the top of Gore Mountain where the Schaefer Trail begins, and really make it sort of a continuous experience, you know, where we can go by the old hunting camp along Diamond Brook, and really highlight some spots of significance, and also, you know, it brings you right into North Creek and all kinds of history there. And so there's a lot of possibilities there, and it's exciting.
Yes, for sure. So now, with as much specificity as you can, Please describe how New York State has influenced the nation and the world through the creation of Forever Wild Forest Preserve lands. So maybe you could talk about what the role of Forever Wild is in the larger wilderness preservation movement, and how does it differ from other types of protections like national parks or national forests?
So, and this is another piece that I wasn't fully aware of until, working in this position and reading more about it. And it really merits so much more. But, there, around the turn of the century, there was a big movement. There was a recognition that what we do on the land has impacts, and there is value in conserving it, protecting it. And, that was exhibited in a lot of different geographies, but also different disciplines. There wasn't really crystallization until there were some I guess I want to get more towards like the significance of moving from thinking and talking about it to putting it into law. That distinction was really what Article 14 did. And in doing so, it became sort of this model for how to protect lands in perpetuity through law. And it, in talking about the significance of our area and the contributions of folks who worked in our area, like Apperson, Schaefer, and Zahniser, they should be mentioned in the same breath as Thoreau, Muir, Leopold, given the significance of their contributions and achievements. So, one of the things that is one of the reasons New York has played this role is because of its codification in law. Like, so, I think, as I recall in a conversation with Ed Zahniser, he had mentioned that his father had looked around for where is the best example of protections that exist today, and those there were examples of places that had been set aside administratively, like by a governor or by a previous president, that had then those actions had been reversed. So they had been administratively designated. And, our Article 14 was something that Howard saw as, having more staying power, with being able to withstand the sort of political winds, and would provide the best protection. So that's why it was chosen as, sort of the model, the best example, not only for the Federal Wilderness Act, but also, around the world. So the difference, let's see. How does it differ? Well, I guess that takes understanding that there are different degrees of land protection. Some types of designations, some lands are protected from ever being cleared of vegetation or developed, paved, but are still working landscapes with extractive uses like timber, minerals, cattle grazing. Most national forests are like that, BLM lands. Some are protected from commercial development and extractive uses, but can be highly developed for human recreational uses like national parks, lake shores, seashores. federal wilderness areas are generally the most restrictive designation, with protection of the natural functioning ecosystems untrammeled by man, which being identified as the highest use or purpose. Wilderness areas can be designated within a national forest or within a national park, a national monument, or other protected lands. But the wilderness level of protection only applies to those lands within the wilderness area. Here in the Adirondacks, we have our own state level designations that are established by the Adirondack Park Agency and the State Land Master Plan, that are not to be confused with federal wilderness areas. But that's another topic maybe for another day. It's the main point is that the legal standard for basic protections against extractive uses and the recognition of the benefits to society of protecting functioning natural ecosystems was born right here, and right here literally. So that's kind of cool.
Can I also ask, just going back to what you were saying about Apperson, Schaefer, and Zahniser not being recognized as much as Thoreau, Muir, and Leopold, despite making equal contributions, do you have any idea as to why that would be?
Well, I don't know. I suspect that it's because largely the efforts that led to Article 14 and what came after were so state in nature, like very sort of internal state processes that, we don't have a big federal agency presence in New York. There's not a lot of national park land or national forest lands, so we didn't have those partners sitting around at the table. It was all sort of internal New York audience. And maybe, sometimes that may limit our sort of profile if we don't raise it to the federal level.
Right.
Sure.
Yeah, thank you. I think I'm going to turn it over to Dan and Bill. I believe they also have some questions, and I may jump in here and there depending on how the conversation goes. Thank you so much.
Sure.
Dan, I think you're muted.
I have to unmute. I'm unmuted now. Kirstin, thanks so much for being here and sharing the news about the commemoration of cabin country, so to speak, the trail up to the summit of Gore. Can you speak in any more specificity in terms of the time frame in which something like that might happen, the process? I know that there is a unit management plan that needs to be satisfied, but what are the steps there that have to be followed?
Sure. So it would be part of that amending in this case, because we have a unit management plan that's already completed. It would be an amendment to that unit management plan. And that is a publicly vetted process. So, we would be putting it all into a proposal, written up document, and then there would be public scoping, presentation. The APA determines if it's consistent with the state land master plan. And then it would go into, once it was finalized, then we would be able to start the work planning process, which would be sort of like, okay, we want to tackle the parking lot first, and we would develop a work plan for that. And that's within the department process. And so we would just identify those projects and tackle them one by one as we go.
So just given your experience, any estimate of how soon it might be possible to, would we be hiking from Edwards Hill Road to the summit of Gore? I mean, is that kind of your vision or around there?
When would you be hiking
Yeah.
to the summit of Gore?
Yeah, I mean, just like, given your experience with these kinds of projects generally, how long do you think something like that might take?
It's very difficult to say. Sometimes, I mean, I've seen an amendment happen within a course of a year, but I've also seen amendments have to wait, and usually there's a reason. Usually there's some issue that needs to be worked out, or communications that need to happen, or whatever it may be. But it's not the same as the original getting the unit management plan finalized and approved. Amendments are usually, I can say that with some degree of confidence, they're usually much shorter in time frame. But no one person carries it through. So
Right.
lots of people involved.
Kirstin,
I want to jump in. Oh, sorry, Bill.
That's okay. Just real quick. Can I take a step back? I'm curious. I'm really interested in the breadth of your career personally, and I'm interested in how the evolution took place, and just in your own mind, from the earlier part of your career to where you are now. Specifically, were there things that you learned about all of this when you were doing your own consulting that really drew you to the position you're in now? Were there things there that influenced your decision making to join the DEC?
Well, other than really that I knew I would love to work in the Forest Preserve. And I so strongly am supportive of the reason it exists, the example it sets. That was really important to me. So the park itself, the land itself really called to me. But it really is, what I can tell you is that in my career, I had sort of gotten to a place where I was a little bit more removed from the ground, like from being out on the ground, in a regular way, in my work. And this position was this ideal combination of like the broad scale planning, which I had sort of moved towards from the Forest Service to the Nature Conservancy. And it kind of got me back down a little bit closer to the ground, where I can, really get out there and enjoy the lands that we are working for. So, that was very appealing to me.
You like to get your boots muddy.
Yes, very much so.
Sarah?
Sorry, I just wanted to jump in because I got a comment from one of our county supervisors that he asked me to share with you and with the viewers today. And he said he wanted to let you know that most members of the Cataract Club, who hunted out of the Beaver House and along 11th Mountain and the Siamese Trail for 80 plus years, are aware of these conversations, the book project they're watching today, and they're very excited about all of this. So thank you.
That's awesome. That's awesome. I'd love to pick their brains and hear some stories.
Yes, I think we're hoping to connect with some of them as part of this project. So.
Oh yeah, I think we'll have a special show on Deer Week, which is the week in the fall that Paul Schaefer would convene everyone at what was it, Diamond Meadow, I think at first, and then it moved
Diamond.
But anyway, he's written very interestingly on that in Adirondack cabin country, and we've heard recollections from a number of others that we'd like to package and share. So
that's cool.
Kirstin, you had mentioned that there are some areas within your domain where traffic is becoming a problem, density. Are you referring to the Lake George area? Does your area go over there? It doesn't, does it? No, because that's not the Wild Forest. So where do you see, what trouble spots do you see in your part of the world?
And Lake George really does get a lot of traffic. But yeah, that's not my area. But in my areas, places like 13th Lake are really getting a lot. We're seeing just a lot more cars and people right there at the lake, and places that it's largely the places that are were popular, have always been popular, right? Like, so Hadley Mountain, the fire tower there, and Crane Mountain, and Auger Falls. These are all places that are really seeing quite a lot of use. So just need to keep an eye on that.
Are you part of any specific strategy within DEC to try to spread out traffic throughout the 6 million acres of the Adirondacks to try to get it away from the high peaks a bit? Is Tahawus within your domain? I mean, the high peaks area, or is that too far north as far as your part?
Yeah, that's north of me.
That's north of you.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so Route 28 is the northern limit of Siamese. And then down below, like Wilcox, it kind of spreads out. It's got a bunch of little pieces to it, but it goes into Saratoga County. So south of 28 basically is me. And there are definitely efforts. There are definitely efforts department-wide looking at how to deal with the higher use that we're seeing in different places, including the high peaks. There are definitely debates on how best to do that. And I don't know where they are in those conversations. They're generally happening well above my pay grade. But I personally, I think about that I'm hesitant to sort of bring all use up to a certain, and spread it out so much that now we're impacting more area, but at a lower intensity. I feel like I'm on I would like to see a lot more data collection. And I know that that's a big emphasis right now within the department, to do actually data collection on visitor use and do some monitoring, and then make decisions based on data would be in my comfort zone, rather than sort of indiscriminately pointing people to places without a plan ahead of time, which I know that partner organizations are trying to be very helpful in doing that, but I do think we should do it with a plan. So that we don't just have another problem somewhere else.
Mm-hmm.
So
Kirstin, I'm curious what is the plan to collect that data? Will you be using trail counters, or will you be doing counts from the log books? How exactly will you be collecting use data? So a lot of different methods are being discussed, and so I'm certainly, I can't speak to what they're coming. They're literally coming up with these different approaches as we're speaking. So we have used trail counters. We have trail counters. We have used them. We don't have them everywhere, but we definitely are trying to strategically use them. We do keep track of our register books, but there are issues with people not signing in. But there are people sitting in parking lots counting people and cars. So I don't think any one way is going to be it. There are lots of different, if you've ever seen the Strava heat maps that are, give you a sense of use levels. I would love it if we could figure out how to do something that also will utilize people's phones. That would be
handy. And then something that kind of can combine all of those data sources in a consistent way is going to be very important. So
I assume that this problem is not unique to New York. Are you in touch with other states to compare notes on their experiences in the last couple of years?
And short answer, me personally, no. But a longer answer could be provided by our, so we have a new Adirondack Forest Preserve. Gosh, I can't think of his actual title right now, but Josh Clegg down in Albany is really heading up and taking forward this visitor use monitoring effort that is underway in the Adirondacks, and is very much working with other federal. There is a visitor use monitoring protocol that has been developed by the feds, all together. And that has been very helpful and informative in them trying to figure out what we're going to do here. I think aspects of that are going to be implemented, in the short term. And I think longer term, they're looking at, does New York need its own special thing, or can we piggyback off of that? Can we use it out of the box? Those are all questions they're working through right now. And I think they're really have made quite a bit of headway on it. So that's exciting.
And I guess one of the challenges, it seems to me that things have changed so rapidly in the space just in a couple of years, mostly, I guess, or maybe not mostly, but largely due to the pandemic, raising the interest that people have in outdoor activity. So the question, I guess, is this a permanent condition, or will things return to something resembling the way they were pre-2020?
Yeah, I think a lot of folks are asking that exact question. There was just an outdoor recreational conference this past fall where there were several presentations where academicians are very much asking this question. There were some places that actually did not see a rise. They saw a drop, and they were trying to figure that out too. Some of it was because there were only local town and county parks, and those lands were closed. They closed them. People couldn't go there to congregate. So people's outdoor use kind of dropped. It was interesting. And then other places where they just really saw a spike, and it's a very good question. We don't know.
I saw an article, I think it was in Adirondack magazine, that predicted that, say, by the middle of the century, the climate of the Adirondacks would be approximately the same as, I think it was North Carolina.
Wow.
Which is pretty frightening. But I was just wondering, looking at climate change, what worries you most? Is it the beetle infestations? Do you see a possibility of wildfires ultimately, increasing? Certainly hope we don't see it happen in the Adirondacks, what's happening in California, but I guess we get more rain, so that's less likely. But what are your thoughts on the biggest threats?
Well, I mean, we are lucky in terms of water. I feel like the Adirondacks is quite lucky. We could stand to dry out a little bit, but some might say. But no, I think the biggest concerns really are with the changing climate, seeing, I get very concerned about pests and pathogens, and the fact that cold is not necessarily going to keep them out anymore. But largely it is species change. So the species composition of the forest, I think we'll still functionally always have forest. It's just a question of, are we down here in the southern part of the Adirondacks going to be more oaky than ever before. And those types of compositional changes. Our maples, you know, moving or being limited to further north, and that sort of compositional change is a concern.
Back to the plan, the commemoration plan, I'll call it. The long path is, I think, important in your thinking about this right now. DEC is looking a little bit more closely at the plan that Vincent and Paul Schaefer came up with in 1931. This path that runs from the George Washington Bridge up to as far as Whiteface Mountain, if you want to go that far. What's your thinking about the long path and the contribution that DEC and Warren County could make to developing that concept in those trails?
Well, I mean, I think that the long path is very cool. And I think that some of the initial work that I saw that the county was doing is really neat in terms of those waypoints along the way and their historical significance. And it is kind of exciting because of the intent of it being sort of a Easter egg hunt. But in terms of the department, you know, we don't have any real role with it per se, other than that some of those waypoint locations fall on state lands. And so people may trek to them as intended by Vincent. So I think that's very cool. I'm not sure if you're asking, are we developing routes or any sort of infrastructure around that? There are no plans to do that at this time.
Yeah, I know that the county has some thoughts on that as well, and I guess we'll just see that emerge. Sarah, I don't know if you want to comment at all on that.
Sure. So we have been working with the Long Path North Hiking Club. Their members have volunteered to document the landmarks. So as you mentioned, Dan, this was envisioned as a series of landmarks, not as a blazed trail that went from New York City up to the top of Whiteface, which we've talked about this a little bit in past conversations, but for new listeners, that trail was actually blazed, I think back in the 70s from New York City, I believe, up to the Mohawk River, maybe a little bit north of that. But the remainder of the landmarks have not been blazed, and the intent is not to turn that into a blazed trail. It's essentially just to revisit those landmarks from Vincent's original landmark guide, and to just see what the status of them is now. So many of them are on state land, and so we're able to visit them. Some of them are on private land, so we can't visit them, or we'll need to, coordinate with landowners to visit them. But the hiking club members have been in the process of finding them. Some of them are no longer in existence in some cases, such as large trees that have fallen down, but many of them are still there. So this has been a fun project, and our hope is to just kind of publish an updated guide to these landmarks with current information. And of course, for the ones that are on state land, people can definitely navigate to them. That I believe Vincent's intent was that people get to them on their own. Not via a blazed trail, but that part of the experience of doing this long path was to get themselves from landmark to landmark. So the one thing that we are excited about, though, that we've talked a little bit about today, is that some of those landmarks will be connected when they wouldn't otherwise have been able to be easily connected by the potential new trail, the Diamond Brook Trail that Kirstin was talking about, that goes past the Schaefer's old hunting camp. Because a couple of those landmarks, there's a lean-to on Edwards Hill Road near the cabins that is one of the landmarks. and then the summit of Gore, and also North Creek. And I think there's a couple other landmarks in the same area. So putting that trail in will enable people to more easily traverse between a couple of those landmarks, which is great. I feel like it all kind of is tying together nicely.
Coming together.
We're excited about.
Well, that's great. Kirstin, do you have any more thoughts for us, or any more questions, Bill or May?
Well, you know, one of my favorite questions toward the end of an interview is, what have we not asked you that we should have asked you?
Uh-oh. I don't know. My mind is entirely blank right now.
Well, I think we're probably responsible for that. But I guess the one thing I would ask you to, if you could reflect on it at all, I think sometimes when I'm out hiking, and in particular in Wilcox or some of the areas you're responsible for, I have this kind of strong sense of the history of all of this and the influence of all the people who made this possible decades ago. And I just wonder, in your day-to-day work, is that something that comes to mind from time to time? Do you ever get a chance to, particularly when you're getting your boots buddy, to reflect on that, to think about that?
Absolutely. Absolutely. The Adirondacks, not just this area and not just the influence that went well beyond New York, but, just so many parts of the Adirondacks are amazing, but honestly, just the sheer size of it, and I should make a plug for, it's something that's little understood, I think, by the public, but, with the park agency and the state land master plan came, I think, something that was genius and really is what has allowed, I think, this great experiment to continue so long, is just this idea of a gradient of use levels within this. So the whole park being under this umbrella of forever wild protection, but within that we have this gradient of uses that like wilderness, wild forest, all the different classifications that the APA established in the 70s, that actually allows for a variety of different ways the public can enjoy the park. So it allows for more access in some places and limited access in others, and it ends up being kind of like a zoning for forest ecosystems, which is great because it can sort of reduce the conflict. Somebody says, hey, I want to ride my bike. Oh, well, you can ride your bike right here, right here, right here, and right here. These areas, we're going to say, no bikes in these areas. We're going to limit them over here. But that way, those opportunities are still available to all. And you still have a higher degree of protection over here and more access over here. And it gives a lot of flexibility to managers, for sure.
And your comment about just the sheer scale of the Adirondack Park is just amazing. I mean, every now and then when I'm talking to friends of mine in other states, and they don't really understand New York the way they should, I say, look at a map. Look at northeastern New York and look at the 6 million acres inside this little blue line. And you get a sense for what this state is all about. Yeah.
Well, bigger than the 5 biggest national parks put together, right?
There you go. Yeah.
And I mean, look at an image from space. We show up, it's pretty cool.
That's very cool. I like that a lot. Yeah.
It is. And east of the Mississippi, you really can't beat it. I mean, it's the biggest thing going.
Yeah.
Biggest intact landscape level system that's, in existence. So that's pretty cool. Really, really cool.
Very, very cool. Absolutely. Yeah. Anything else? May, anything else?
I think that might cover it. We've gone almost an hour. May has plenty of content to work with here. She'll be working on a story, a summary of this that we'll publish in the next few weeks. We'll be reviewing that with you, Kirstin. And as far as next week goes, we try to have one of these conversations every week. We don't have anything yet scheduled for next Thursday, but we certainly have some ideas, and we expect we'll be able to announce something by Tuesday, which is when we send out our newsletter now to keep everybody posted on what's coming up. So look for our next newsletter, and we'll keep you posted on what's happening on Stories from Open Space. So thanks, everybody. And we hope to see you next week.
Thanks again, Kirstin.